Okay, so what we're going to look at in this lesson is rounding off decimals. So the two rules that we have for rounding decimals are if the last digit is 5 or more, we increase the previous digit by 1. And if the last digit is 4 or less, we leave the previous digit as it is. So what do we mean by that? So if we take this example, so if we take 3.86, and if we want to round this to one decimal place, so what we do is, so this here is the decimal place, and we want to keep one decimal place. So that means we're keeping one number after the decimal point. So what we do is we look at we go to the one decimal place, and we look at the number after the decimal point. And what we do is we apply these two rules. So if the last digit is 5 or more, we increase the previous digit by 1. So we can see here in this case, so this is the first decimal place. We look at the number afterwards. We can see that it's 5, it's more than 5. So therefore we have to increase the previous digit, which is this one, by 1. So what will happen is this will become 3.9. So that's it, rounded up to one decimal place. So this is one decimal place. So if we look at this next example, so if we take, let's say 7.43, and we want to round 7.43 to one decimal place. So again, we look, this is the decimal point. We look at the number, so we're going to keep one decimal place. So we're going to keep this first decimal place, or this first number after the decimal point. Now what we have to do is we have to decide, do we round this up or do we just leave it the way it is? So again, we look at our rules. So in this case, if the last digit is 4 or less, we leave the previous digit as it is. So if we look here, so we can see here that it's 4. So therefore, we look at this, we can see that this number is less than 4. So what we do is we just keep this first decimal place the way that it is. So that will become 7.4. So notice in this case, because 3 is less than 4, we don't need to round up this number. In this case, we looked at, so this is the decimal place that we want to keep. We look at the number after it. We can see that it's more than 5, it's 6. So we have to increase this number then by 1. So that goes to 3.9. Whereas this one, we look at the number after the first decimal place, which is 3. We can see that that's less than 4. So therefore, we don't need to increase this. We just keep it the way that it is. So if we look at some more examples, so if we take, let's say, the number 24.6, so 24.6, so we can see that there's a decimal place here. And what we're being asked to do is to correct this number to the nearest whole number. So that means we're not going to have any decimal place after it. So in this case, what we have to do is we look at this. So we look at this number here, which is 4, and we look at the number after it, and we apply these rules. So we see that the number after 4 is 6. That number is greater than 5. So therefore, this 4 has to be rounded up by 1. So this will become 25. So this is rounded, this is to the nearest whole number. Remember, a whole number, it doesn't have any decimal place after it. So we see here that this number here will round up to 25. If we were to take, let's say, this number, which is 16.425, and what we're being asked to do with this number is correct to 2 decimal place. So if we write it like this, so this is going to be to 2 decimal places. So what that means is after the decimal point, we want to keep two of the numbers or two places after the decimal point. So what we do is, again, we look at the second decimal place and we apply this rule. So we look at the number after it, or we look at, so in this case, we want the second decimal place is 2. So we have to look at the number afterwards. The number after it is 5. So we can see here that this rule up here will apply. If the last digit is 5 or more, we increase the previous digit by 1. So what that means is that this number here, 2, has to increase by 1 if we want to correct it to 2 decimal places. So that's going to be equal to 16.43. So notice that this number has been increased by 1 as per this rule here. So the next thing then that I want to look at is, how do we express a fraction as a decimal? So we want to express a fraction as a decimal. So what we do is, so imagine we have this fraction here, for example. So we have 3/4. So this is a fraction. The number at the top is called the numerator. The number at the bottom is called the denominator. Now, if I want to change this to a decimal, all I have to do is I divide the denominator, which is the number on the bottom, into the numerator, which is the number on the top. So it'll look something like this. So it's going to be equal to 4 divided by 3.00. So we just divide it in. So 4 will not go into 3. 4 into 30 goes 7 times. 7 times. And 2 over. And then 4 into 20 goes 5 times. So what happens is this here, when I divide 4 into 3, this is how I divide it in. And this will then become, we can see our answer here, which is 0.75. So what we've done is we've taken this fraction and we've expressed it as a decimal. So all we do is we divide the bottom into the top. So if we look at another example, so if we take the fraction 5 divided by 8, so again we divide this bottom number into the top. So what will that look like? So it looks something like this. So it'll be 5.00, and then we divide it by 8, like so. So 8 into 5 won't go. 8 into 50 goes 6 times. So it goes 6 times with, so 6 times 48 with 2 over. And then 8, we'll just put an extra 0 on there. So then 8 into 20 goes twice, and 4 over. And then 8 into 40 goes 5 times, like so. So again, what that becomes then, it becomes, so 5 over 8, we divide the bottom into the top, we divide it like this, and this then becomes, as a decimal, it'll be 0.625. So what we've done is we've taken this fraction and we have expressed it as a decimal. Now, what you can easily do as well, you can use your calculator and you can just divide, for example, the bottom number into the top. Now, what can happen sometimes, like if you have, let's say, something like this. So if you have 2 over 3, so 2 over 3, and if you divide 2 by 3, it's going to be, you're going to get something that it'll look like this. So even if you want to do this on your calculator, so take 2 divided by 3, and what you'll notice is that you'll get 0.66666, and this just keeps recurring here. So this number, this decimal place 6, It just keeps going on and on and on. And this is what's known as a recurring decimal. So it's a recurring decimal. Now, what you can do is you can actually use your calculator, and and generally with this, like if you use your calculator, you'll get this. What you can do is you can just give it correct to, depending on what the question asks you for. So it might ask you to give it to 1 decimal place or 2 decimal places, and then you just follow the rules that we have we've discussed previously. Now also as well, just on your calculator, like if you were to do something like this, so if you take 3, so let's say 3 over 7, and if you divide these into each other, so 3 divided by 7, you're going to get an answer that will be equal to 0.42857. So it looks something like that. So if you divide 3 divided by 7. Now, if it's a case, sometimes what can happen, you can get, when you do this, when you take 3 and you divide it by 7, your calculator will just show it like this. It'll write it, it'll give you an answer of, it'll just show it as a fraction 3 over 7. So in order to change it into the decimal, what you need to do is, there's this button that's on your calculator and it looks like this. So if you click on that, so when you put in 3 divided by 7, if it doesn't give you a decimal like this, it'll probably present it in this fraction form. So in order to change it out of this fraction form into this decimal form, if you look on your calculator, there'll be a button that's just S to D, and you can change it by just pressing this button. And what it'll do is it'll change this into a decimal. And just the last thing then that I just want to touch on is this idea of what's called rough estimates. So rough estimates. So rough estimates. So if we were to take something like this, so let's say if you have 3.16, let me just change so you can see this. So if you have 3.16 multiplied by 9.673 divided by 5.38. So you have something like this. So what you need to be able to do is, so without using your calculator, that you need to be able to kind of give a rough estimate, roughly like what this is going to be equal to. So before you kind of stick everything into your calculator, you need to kind of have a general idea of what this is going to calculate up into. So the easiest way to do that is you want to take each of these numbers, which are decimals, and you want to round them to the nearest whole number. So if we think about that, what will that be equal to? So again, if we were to take this 3.6, so again, if we want to round this to the nearest whole number, so that means that we're just going to have a whole number. So we want to get rid of the numbers after the decimal place. So again, you look at this number here, we can see that it's less than 4. So what we can do is this will just drop off and it'll become 3. So it'll just become 3 multiplied by, if we look at this number here, so it's 9.673. Well, what will happen to this is, because this number here, we want to get rid of the decimals, so this is where we want to end up. We look at the number afterwards, we see here that it's greater than 5, so what we have to do is we have to round this up by 1, so it'll become 10, like so, divided by, we look at the number at the bottom, so we can see that we want to round this up, so that means we want to get rid of the decimal places. So we look at the number after the decimal place, which is 3, we see that it's less than 4, so again this just stays the same, so this will round to 5, like so. Then what we can do is we can just we multiply the top first. So it's going to be 3 multiplied by 10, so that's equal to 30 over 5. And then what we can do, sorry now, that's been cut off there. So then what we can do then is we can just divide 30 by 5, and that's equal to 6. So we have a rough idea that our answer, a rough estimate, if we take something like this, it's going to come out at about 6. Now, if you use your calculator and you just put in these values here, what you'll find is that your answer will work out as 5.68. It works out like that. And this is correct to 2 decimal places. Okay, so it'll round something like that. Now what we can do is, so see, instead of using this equal sign here, so this here is a rough estimate. So what you do is, instead of using an equal sign like this, we'll just rub this out, you kind of use this, it's like a wavy equal sign like that. So what that means is that it's an estimate. So it's roughly equal to that, roughly equal. It's not exactly equal, it's roughly equal to that. So this is the idea of what we call rough estimates. So that's really it. So we're just looking at rounding off decimals. We've just looked at the rules, and that is it really. We've looked at how to express a fraction as a decimal, and then how to do what's known as a rough estimate. Okay, thank you for listening.